Hi everyone, and welcome. Today I'm going to walk you through how to make sugar cookies, and I'm going to start with making the dough. Today we're going to use the creaming method, which incidentally can be used for other types of cookies and other types of rolled cookies. The type of sugar cookie that we're doing today is going to be a rolled cookie. This is part one of a three-part series. The second part will be how to roll out the sugar cookie dough, punch it out, and bake it. And the third part of this series will involve showing you how to do some basic decorating tips, something that will look amazing but be simple. To make a sugar cookie, what you'll need is a mixer. You can use a handheld mixer or a stand-up mixer like this one. You'll want a paddle attachment. You'll want to have a scale. I prefer my scales to have a top that's removable. That makes it easier for cleanup. You'll want to have some measuring spoons, a spatula. Oh, I almost forgot. You'll need a bowl and you'll need a whisk. The first step to making a delicious and decadent sugar cookie is to cream your butter and your sugar. For this recipe, I need about 225 grams of butter. I prefer unsalted butter. That's because the salt in butter acts as a preservative. It's important that the butter that you use is soft. You want it soft enough that you can gently press on the top and make an indent halfway through the stick of butter. Take that 225 grams of butter and add it to your mixer. I like to begin by gently beating the butter first. Once I do that, I then go ahead and measure my sugar. For this recipe, I want 360 grams of sugar. Notice how when I put this cup on the scale, it reads 17 grams. When that happens, I want to zero out my scale. Sometimes the button will say 0, other times it will say tare. Now it reads 0, and it won't include the weight of my cup in the final measurement. Come on. 360 grams. This sugar that I'm using is just a plain standard sugar. It's also known as superfine sugar. However, if you would like to use a cane sugar, you're more than welcome to. Just a simple plain cane sugar will do. Notice the color difference in this. Well, I'm not sure if you can see it. But if you look, it's about the same size and it's slightly more tan than the white sugar. Either one is useful. Either one is tasty. Add your sugar to your butter and beat it together with the paddle attachment. Start at the slow setting just so that you don't have sugar flying up into your face. Then gradually bring it up to about a medium speed or a medium-high speed. I'm going to let these two things beat together for a little while. I want a nice, good, creamy texture to it. You know that your butter and your sugar are well creamed when your butter is light and fluffy and pale in color. Be sure to scrape down the sides of your bowl regularly. That way you don't have anything stuck to the bottom or to the sides and didn't get incorporated in your final product. I'm going to turn this up to a high speed. Meanwhile, while the butter and the sugar are being beaten together, That sounds very vicious, actually. While I'm creaming the butter and the sugar together, I'm going to measure out my flour, my cocoa powder, and my salt. The flour that I need today is 400 grams. I've already measured it out, and so I'm just going to add it to a bowl. I'm going to measure out 1 teaspoon of baking powder. I'm using double-acting baking powder, which essentially means that it rises in 2 ways. It rises, or it begins that rising process the first time when liquid hits it. In this case, that will be our sugar. And it then continues to rise, or it begins rising a second time once it hits the oven. That's what double-acting baking powder means. For this flour and baking powder mixture, I'm going to add half a teaspoon of salt. I like to use either a kosher salt or Himalayan sea salt. The reason is for that is because they're easily distinguishable from the sugar. The kosher salt has a larger granule, whereas the Himalayan salt is pink, so I won't accidentally pick up sugar instead of salt or salt instead of sugar. For this recipe, I'm going to go ahead and use the Himalayan pink salt. Himalayan salt also has a little bit of minerals to it, so it does add a different flavor profile to it. I happen to like it for my sugar cookies. You can either use a whisk or use a sifter and blend all of those ingredients together. I choose to use a whisk as opposed to sifting it. It's really not necessary for this particular recipe. For something like cakes, I would find it more necessary. As you're whisking, if you find particular lumps of something like the baking powder, feel free to put your fingers in there and squish those lumps out. Once you've measured your flour, your baking powder, and your salt, set it aside. You'll come back to it later. Look at the 2 butters. The butter that I've creamed still looks a little bit yellow, so I'm going to go ahead and cream it longer. Remember, the colder your butter is, the longer it's going to take to cream. Let's take a look at what we have here. Look at how beautiful that is. This is much, much better. See how much whiter this butter actually is? And the sugar, oh, it looks completely incorporated in there. Let's compare it to some regular butter that hasn't been creamed. Oh yeah, there's a clear difference there. See how much whiter this looks? And look, it's fluffier too. Lastly, I'm going to touch it. Does it feel like, with my fingertip, does it feel like I get equal amounts of fat and sugar in there? If it does, you have a really well creamed butter and sugar mixture. This one took a little bit of time because my butter was a little bit on the chilly side. Keep in mind that the softer your butter is, the faster it's going to actually cream. Now that I've successfully creamed my butter and my sugar together, I'm going to add my eggs and I'm going to add my vanilla. For this recipe, I'm going to add 2 eggs. I test to see if they're a good temperature against the inside of my wrist. If they feel a little bit cooler than my wrist, you know the eggs are just a tiny bit too cool. These are just right. Add your eggs all at one time. Then add your vanilla. This recipe calls for 1 tablespoon of vanilla. I like to use a Mexican vanilla because I like the flavor profile just a little bit better. It's just my favorite. There really isn't a bad choice when it comes to vanilla, honestly. If for whatever reason you want to make these cookies just a little bit fancier, feel free to use some other kind of ingredient. Something like, almond extract or orange extract or maybe vanilla and almond extract. It would be lovely together. Let yourself be a little creative and play around with it. Just make sure that the total amount of extract that you choose is 1 tablespoon. I mix the eggs and the vanilla with the sugar and the butter mixture at about a medium speed. If you'll notice, it looks like the eggs and the sugar and things are not coming together. They look slightly split right now. That's okay. Don't worry about this. We're going to keep mixing. I'm going to scrape the stuff that's on the bottom, and then I'm going to mix it at about a medium speed to bring that back together. All right. Be sure to scrape all the way to the bottom so that everything gets incorporated together. I mix my eggs, vanilla, and butter and sugar together until it's homogeneous. That means it doesn't look like it's splitting anymore. You really don't want to mix it too much more than that, because the more you mix it when you've added the egg in there, the more cake-like your cookie will be. If, however, you want a really cakey cookie, feel free to mix away. The next step is to add the flour, baking powder, and salt mixture to my butter and egg mixture. I'm going to mix the flour in with this until it just comes together, because I don't want to mix it too much. The more you mix it when you add the flour, the more likely it's going to be a tough cookie in the end because of all the gluten development. The flour has been incorporated into the dough. So at this point, I want to scrape off the paddle attachment. And I'm going to scrape the sides of the bowl just to make sure that every bit of that flour has been incorporated in, as well as scrape the bottom of the bowl to make sure that all the butter and the sugar has been mixed in pretty well. Once that's done, I'm going to pat it into discs and wrap it in saran wrap. This will then go into the refrigerator for a minimum of 1 hour and a maximum of a week. So before I remove any of the batter from the bowl, I place a layer of saran wrap or plastic on the table. This recipe can be easily divided up into approximately three batches. So that's what I'm going to do. When I put them into discs, which is what I'm ultimately going to do, I like to make sure that I flatten my discs as much as possible. This makes it easier to roll out your cookies in the end, because then you don't have this thick layer that you're trying to smash down with that rolling pin. Instead, you have a lot of even small layers. Maybe it's a little bumpy and you're just trying to even it out. It's a whole lot easier on the arms. So what I do is I take this portion and I fold it over and I smash it with my hands. And this way, my hands stay clean because I'm actually smashing it within the plastic. Don't worry about being too precise at this point. When you roll it out, you'll get there. It'll get more perfect. It's all right. Nobody's going to know. There we go. So that's one flattened kind of rectangular disc. Not really round, but we're going with it. Now it's off to the refrigerator with these 3 flat disc-like things for a minimum of an hour, a maximum of a week. You can also freeze this dough if you'd like to. If it's frozen, Try and double wrap it. It'll be a little bit better for the dough in the long run. It won't take on any smells that are sitting in your freezer. And after you double wrap it, be sure to label it. It will be good in the freezer for 4 months. Thank you for joining me on how to make sugar cookie dough. If you liked this video, please feel free to hit like. If you have any suggestions or comments, feel free to add them in the comments below. And of course, if you like this, please subscribe. Thank you. Cook-Up-In Monster! Rah!